Welcome to the Longevity Formula with Dr. Brandon Crawford. Let's explore the new era of wellness.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Longevity Formula podcast. I'm Dr. Brandon Crawford. I'm extremely excited about today's podcast. We're going to be talking about a huge topic. This is a foundational topic. This is something that everybody needs to pay attention to. We're talking about circadian biology. I'm calling this the ultimate biohack for optimal health. I know that some people don't like that term biohack, but I like it. Here's why. It's an actionable thing that can improve your health. So let's do it. Let's live better, right? So who does this apply to and what does this mean? Well, it applies to everyone, newborns, older people, everyone in between. So if you're breathing, you need to pay attention. This applies to people with injuries, with some type of illness or health concern, but this also applies to people that just want to thrive. They want to be better. They want to keep their edge or gain their edge. So this applies to everyone. Now, circadian biology, I'm going to have several analogies throughout this podcast, but let me start by kind of setting it up like this. So if you can imagine an orchestra, right, or a band, whatever you want to call it, and whenever that band comes together and they start playing music, right, they start creating this symphony. Let's think of that music that they're creating as life. Okay. There's various components within that band. There's the trumpet section, there's the saxophones, there's the percussion, there's all these things. They have to be together. They have to be timed together to create music. Otherwise, it's just noise, right? So if we're going to have this beautiful music that we call life, everything has to be timed properly. Everything has to be in sync. Otherwise, it gets dysfunctional. It gets unrecognizable. It gets painful, and it just doesn't work. It's cluttered. It's not good. So I know that, there's several people that think that they can skirt around this and they can just push through, right? This is most commonly found in like our high-level executives. They say things like, I'll wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning and I only need 3 hours of sleep and things like this. But here's the thing. Unless there's a genetic alteration in that individual, which is rare, that's not true. There are sleep parameters. There are still circadian rhythms and cycles that apply to everyone unless you have this genetic mutation, which again is extremely rare. And there's a reason why things like mental health disorders run rampant in this population. High-level CEOs and executives have some of the highest suicide rates among anyone. There's a reason for that. They have chronic anxiety, depression, they have cardiovascular disease, diabetes. I'm going to tell you why they have that, right? This topic is an actionable topic that you can apply to your children, that you can apply to yourselves, you can apply to your parents, you can apply to your patients if you're a clinician or provider of some type. So I hope you enjoy it. This is going to be amazing. If you want any more information about the podcast, show notes, etc., visit my website, drbrandоncrawford.com. So I love this quote. A lot of this information is coming out of a book that I read recently. It's called The Circadian Code by Dr. Sachin Panda. He has a PhD. He's one of the leading researchers for circadian rhythms, for circadian clocks and all the things. He's actually helped to uncover some of this information. He's discovered a lot of it. He's been a part of several teams, several of the research teams. But I love this quote. He says, "A disrupted circadian clock is the mother of all maladies." And once we really get into this, you're going to understand why that's true. But don't worry, because I'm also going to give you actionable steps that you can take to start to reverse some of these chronic health issues or prevent them. And yes, I ended up quoting myself. So this is from a book that I will publish soon. It's titled Never Accept Never. It's the brain's blueprint to healing. So in order to help what is wrong in the brain and body, we first have to know and understand how our systems are designed to work in sync to produce the symphony we call life. Okay, so let's use another analogy, right? We already used the orchestra. But let's get a little more mechanistic, right? That orchestra demonstration is for my more abstract thinkers, my right brainers. Let's get a little more mechanistic for the left brainers out there. So if we go into downtown Austin, right? So if we jump in our cars, we head to downtown Austin. It's a busy city. We get into the city and we need red lights. We need stop signs. We need yield signs. We need crosswalks. We need all of these things, right? So all of that helping to control people in and out and around the city, that's all timed. And it's timed in various ways. It's timed so that traffic can flow through. It's timed so that people can walk from building to building. It's even got other timing mechanisms for things like water flow and all types of logistical and structural needs for the city. This is all timed. And all of that data, right, that is being collected, the number of cars going through, the number of people walking through, the amount of water demands and electrical demands, and all of those things going through that grid or that city, this is all being reported back to a central system. Within that system, the government, there's engineers. And those engineers are reading the data and then altering the timing of all of those systems so that there continues to be this nice flow of people in and around the city. So that's the same thing for our body. So we have these timing mechanisms. They're genetic. They're in our cells. But we also have timing mechanisms within the brain. That's our central control hub, which is very responsive to environmental cues. And our brain, and I'll get into what parts of the brain, but our brain is constantly monitoring all this data coming back from our environment. And it's going to then set into motion the proper sync of timing and all of these things that our metabolic systems need so that we have good health, right? Unless it does not get good data in. If it gets bad data in, it's going to give bad data out, and we're going to have disruptions in those timing mechanisms and those rhythms, right? Okay, so a Nobel Prize was actually awarded for the discovery of the circadian rhythms. It was awarded in 2017. It was actually given to Jeff Hall, Michael Rosbash, Michael Young. So they were the original pioneers. And then, like I said, people like Dr. Panda has furthered the research and done some amazing things with that information. So the circadian clock, this is Dr. Panda talking. Just again, I really want everyone to fully understand this. The circadian clock is the internal timing system that interacts with the timing of light and food. And I'm going to give a few other parameters, but those are big factors. Timing of light and food to produce our daily rhythms. Our job is to maintain the clock so we can live with optimal health, right? So again, there's other stimuli at play, but the big ones are light and food. We'll also talk about movement. We'll talk about temperature. We'll talk about our sleep habits. We'll talk about all those things, but light and food, those are huge. Okay, so what does circadian mean? Well, circadian comes from two different words, circa meaning around, diem meaning day. So this is around a day. So these are physiological processes that occur within about a 24-hour period of time. This is true for all organisms. This is true for humans. This is true for plants. This is even true for mold. There's a mold called Neurospora that actually there's research on this, that there's actually circadian mechanisms as to when they reproduce and when they try and spread their spores and when they be more invasive and when they go to sleep and when they're dormant, all these things, right? So this is true in the single cell organisms. This is also very true for us multicellular humans, right? So we need to pay attention to it. So what's coordinating all this? Like I said, your brain, your genetics, they're intimately coordinating it all. And when I say all, I mean all neurophysiological processes. I'm going to give you information about what parts of the brain directly and indirectly are being influenced here and what the complications can be if they're out of sync. But everything from neurotransmitters, memory consolidation, creative thinking, there's a perfect time of day for creative thinking. Gut motility, digestive enzyme release, muscle strength and endurance. There's reasons why us clinically in our office, we actually time how we go through therapies and with patients based on circadian biology. Fatigue or having plenty of energy, right? This is all based on circadian rhythms. From a more clinical perspective, something that I've definitely been doing in care for my patients, if someone has an inflammatory problem, if someone has some type of immune dysregulation, hormonal issues, we need to be thinking about these foundational circadian disruptions first because they are foundational, right? We don't first need to go to a supplement. We don't first need to go to a medication. We don't first need to try and cover this up. We first have to get this right. And I'm not saying that you don't need medication, you don't need supplementation, all of those things you do, and I'm okay with that. But those are just going to be a Band-Aid if we really don't get to the root of the problem. And that's something that we've definitely been incorporating, and I'll give some examples there. But every clinician needs to be thinking about this. Now, one interesting study that really started to define all of this was done on plants. And it was interesting because they noticed that as the sun came up, a plant's leaves would open. And this was done, I believe, with the mimosa plant. And so as the sun was coming up, these leaves would open. And it turns out that there's specific times during the day that plant is more effective at doing things like photosynthesizing, which is where you use energy from the sun to create energy for your cells, for the plant cells. Absorbing carbon dioxide. There's certain times when the plant needs to sleep and repair. And this is largely based on the sun. And so as the sun would come up, the leaves would open and they would expand. And then as the sun set, the leaves would wilt, right? And that was very interesting. And they thought, I wonder what would happen if we put these plants in complete darkness. Will they maintain this rhythm? And in fact, they did. Right. And so that was one of the first moments of there's something here. There's timing mechanisms at play in our cells within these organisms. Something is tracking time. Human experiments were harder, but they finally figured out how to do it. And what they did is they put a guy in a cave, literally, in a dark cave, cut him off from the world. And they gave him a cell phone. And they said, call us when you go to sleep, call us when you wake up. And the cool thing was that the person in the cave with a cell phone, he had this set circadian rhythm that even though he was not being exposed to sun, he was not being exposed to external stimuli, he still had roughly a 24 cycle that his biology was set to. So it was very, very interesting. Okay, so how is this occurring? So the brain, and I'm going to tell you what parts, the brain is communicating to your cells and your genes, your genetics. But then your cells and your genetics are also communicating to your brain. So it's this loop that occurs. And within the brain, the stimulus that matters the most is light exposure. It's the first light of the day, especially, but then all the different types of light exposure through the day. From a metabolic standpoint, the main thing that matters there, per research, is your first bite of the day and your last bite of the day. So this feeding or this food timing is what really, really seems to matter. And those two different cycles are talking to one another throughout the day. Now, from a genetic perspective, we have the first gene discovered was called the period gene, PER gene for short, so PER. And this was the first one. And what it's doing is it's in every cell, and it's giving the cell instructions how and when to create proteins so that they can do their cellular functions properly throughout the day. This is true for all organisms. Some organisms, like pond scum, have 3 genes in them. More than a dozen of these genes have been identified in humans and animals. More are being discovered. This is a very rapidly growing and ongoing section of research. So if we were to do, or if I were to give an analogy of what these genes do, just think of an ice maker, right? You have this ice machine, and at night, this ice machine is going to generate ice cubes, and it's going to spit out the same number of ice cubes every night. And when you have that many, it's going to stop. It's going to say, okay, I hit my set amount, boom. So those ice cubes are equivalent to the proteins that are being produced for your cells. And then during the day, you take those ice cubes, and let's say you make smoothies. You start using them, right? You're using these ice cubes throughout the day. And then what happens, you go to sleep, ice maker again, it refills the bin, okay? So that's basically how these genes are working. Now, what if you decide, I don't want to go to sleep, I'm going to make some late night margaritas. So you start using the ice, you're blending up margaritas, and you're up late into the night, and then you go to sleep. Well, guess what? Your ice maker, your ice machine, these period genes, they don't have enough time through the night to properly fill up the bin for the next day. So then you start the day with an inadequate amount of protein in order for those cells to do what they need to do. And this is a cumulative effect, right? And again, going back to what I was saying earlier, there's a reason why people like high-level CEOs that think they only need 3 hours of sleep, or new moms that have a baby at home and they have very broken sleep, or whatever the scenario may be. Shift workers. This is a big problem in shift workers. There's a problem why these demographics have mental disorders, inflammatory disorders, metabolic disorders, and this is a big reason. It's not the only reason, but this is a big reason why. So think of that as, that ice machine analogy, right? This is what happens when we're not getting proper sleep, but this is also what happens when we're getting inadequate or wrong exposures to light. And I'm going to talk about that in a lot more detail. But if we disrupt these genes, we disrupt how our cells function, because those genes are telling our cells how to work and what to do. But remember, they're talking to the brain, and the brain is telling them the data that it's getting that's coming in. So these things are working together to produce the symphony of life, unless they're not. A really cool study or discovery was the glowing fly. This was super cool. So this was Jeff Plotz. His discovery was named a top 10 breakthrough in science in 1997 by Science Magazine. And so basically what he did was he made different parts of the fly glow whenever the circadian genes were active in those parts of the fly. So he was starting to investigate that, these genes, they become active and inactive at different parts of the day. And he was making those parts of the fly actually glow based on when these genes were active. And the interesting thing is that he came to learn that after you kill the fly, those genes or those organs were actually still alive for a few days after the fly was dead. And you would actually still see these flies start to glow in the same circadian rhythm, even after they were dead. So this was kind of unintentional on his part, but he was taking the flies apart. And so he had, the legs separated from the abdomen and the head separated from everything. And so this fly was in pieces. And he took a trip to Vegas. And when he came back, he noticed that even though the fly, all these body parts were separated from the fly's brain, the organs, the body parts would still glow in the proper circadian rhythmic order. So this started the conversation about maybe it's not all connected to the brain. And that's hard for me because I'm a brain guy, right? I love epigenetics, but I don't typically lean too heavy on genetics for treating my patients. I lean heavier into neuroplasticity and looking at the brain and the neurology for people, but this is something that is inarguable. There is a separate genetic argument here that is telling the cells, even when they're separated from the brain, what to do, when to do it. So Dr. Panda's team started researching genes in 2002, and they found that there are over 20,000 genes in our genome that turn off and on at different times in different organs. Every gene in our genome has a circadian cycle. So every gene has a circadian cycle, which is fascinating. However, they do not cycle at the same times, right? So some are on in specific organs at some times, but then those same genes are off in other organs at certain times. Now, here's some Crawford conjecture I'm going to throw at you, because yes, my niche is developmental functional neurology and photomedicine, really looking at photobiomodulation and how laser and light therapy can really be leveraged for health and healing. Those are my niches. However, I also have an acupuncture license and a good amount of training in acupuncture, and I've used it clinically for many years. More so use it with laser application these days. I don't really use needles, but there's good research that shows that might actually be more advantageous. But there's something called an acupuncture horary clock. And in traditional Chinese medicine, what this is this is describing when the energy, or what they call qi, is flowing into different organs and systems in the body, right? So there's a clock, and I have this in the show notes and everything. There's images, or you can go Google acupuncture horary clock, and that's spelled Horary, and you'll see images of this, and you'll see that there are certain times a day when the heart has more chi or energy, and then the small intestine, and then the bladder, and then the kidneys. And that's fascinating because this was discovered thousands of years ago. And this information about these genes, this is relatively new information. So it's just another confirmation that they had some things right in this Eastern medicine. Now, I'm not saying it absolutely perfectly lines up, but the concept is accurate. In fact, I use the horary clock whenever someone has a problem. They say, look, I wake up fretful at 2 a.m. every morning. Every single morning, 2 a.m., I wake up with this problem. I oftentimes will refer to the horary clock. I'll see at 2 a.m., okay, that's going to be the liver, and you always have to go opposite side as well, so it'd be the liver and the small intestine, and we start working on those, whether it's with acupuncture, whether it's with supplementation, whether it's really just looking at this overall circadian biology thing and figuring it out that way. But that's a way that we clinically will dive into these things sometimes. So there's something here. Again, they're still researching this, so I'm not going to say that we have all the answers or research has all the answers, but I thought that was a very interesting overlay of traditional Chinese medicine and this new information on circadian genetics. There is actually research on the horary clock. There's one study titled Horary Acupuncture, using the law of countering fluxes to create simple point prescriptions for complex illnesses. There's other research articles as well, but I just want you to know it is legitimate, it's well researched, and now there's overlap even in the genetic world. So now, if I get to start talking more from my neurology perspective, again, this is really my passion. We start to think through embryological ties. So how our nervous system develops even has this circadian nature to it. So we have the neuroectoderm, right? So neuroectoderm, it's part of that early embryological development when you're still in the womb. And that's composed of neural crest cells, and it turns into the neural tube. But here's the thing. So this neuroectoderm, it's going to turn into things like autonomic nervous system ganglia. So the autonomic nervous system, things like the vagus nerve, the enteric nervous system, our dorsal root ganglia, cartilage in the face, parts of our hearts and our heart and lungs, ciliary bodies in the eye, adrenal medulla, the brain itself, the spinal cord, the retina. All of these things come from neuroectoderm. What else comes from it? The pigment in our skin, the melanin. This is also neuroectoderm tissue. These things all develop together right when we're in the womb. This is all developing together. Now, we have a saying in functional neurology, what fires together wires together, right? Or what wires together fires together. That was Dr. Hebb, I believe. And this is important to consider because you have this melanin and these melanocytes, okay, these receptors for light. This is how you get a tan, right? I'm getting too white. I need my melanin to darken up. My wife was just telling me this. So, but what's going on? It's cold right now. I'm not outside as much as I should be. I should, but I'm not. And so this melanin has a very intimate connection with our nervous system. And if you continue this discussion, which we will in later podcasts, but melanin acts as one of our main semiconductors in our body. It's providing cellular energy in and of itself. So there's this very intimate embryological connection between light and our nervous system. From the very beginning, we cannot separate these things. So it's very fascinating. And something again, if you're a practitioner or if you have a health problem or a challenge, we have to think through these things. Like this is not like a side deal, like, yeah, okay, light kind of matters, whatever, melanin, okay. No, this is how we develop and this is how we're designed to function. right? So if we're dysfunctional, we have to go back to the roots. We have to figure this stuff out. I love how Dr. Panda says, light for health is not the same as light for sight. I'm going to get more into that. Okay, so when all these daily rhythms are disturbed for as little as a day or two, our clocks cannot send out the right messages to these genes, and our body and mind will not function as well as we need. If this disruption continues for a few days, weeks, months, we may succumb to all types of infections, diseases, anything ranging from insomnia to ADHD, depression, anxiety, migraines, diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, dementia, even cancer. Now, here's the thing, that's not conjecture. All of those items I just named can be found in the literature tied to disrupted circadian rhythms. So if you know someone suffering from any of those things, this information applies to them. If you want to prevent any of those things, this information applies to you. Okay? Let's talk about jet lag. Okay? Let's talk about a term called social jet lag. So, obviously, if I'm in Austin, and if I get on a plane and I fly to another time zone, and let's say 3 hours ahead, right? Now, what just happened is I very quickly changed time zones. My brain knew I was moving, but it didn't know that my location on Earth just moved by that much. When I land, my circadian rhythm is still set for Central Time. My circadian rhythm is still set for Austin, Texas. So I'm going to have to reset that clock. So what do I need to do? Well, I have to expose myself to light. So I need to see the sun setting. I need to see the sun rising. I need to be outside as much as I possibly can. I need to watch when I eat. I'm going to tell you when to eat. But I need to be doing those things in order to prevent this thing we call jet lag, or you can't really prevent it. It's going to happen, or help recover from it. And general rule of thumb, for every 1 hour of time zone change, it typically takes 1 day to recover your circadian rhythm. Now, there's ways to accelerate this, but there's also people that maybe they already have some type of disease or chronic health issue, and those people may take 2 days per 1 hour. Those people may take 3 days per 1 hour. Those people, even with this daylight savings time thing that I don't think should happen, even with those little 1 hour time changes, those people may be thrown off for a week or two, especially our children. This can impact their circadian rhythms actually to a greater degree. But then there's also something called social jet lag. This is something maybe you haven't heard about, but think about your typical week and your weekend routines. So during the week, most of us are going to be going to work. You're going to be going to bed relatively at the same time, waking up at the same time, etc. Rinse and repeat Monday through Friday. But then what happens on Friday night? Most people stay up later. What happens Saturday morning? Most people sleep in later. So let's say you stay up 2 hours later, and let's say you wake up 2 or 3 hours later, okay? That is the same. It has the same ramifications as if you just traveled 2 or 3 hour time zones away. Research proves it. So it's not just sleeping in, it's not just staying up late. You still disrupt your circadian rhythm by staying up late on the weekends and sleeping in on the weekends. The best thing for your circadian rhythm is to stay on your set rhythm, right? Your set timed rhythm, which there are ideal parameters for this, right? We should wake up 30 to 60 minutes before the sun rises. We should go to sleep 3 hours after our last bite, right? And I'll get into that more, right? But these are very important things to note. Now, another thing to note is shift workers. A large percentage of our workforce, I think roughly about 25%, are actually some type of shift worker. This can be anything from medical personnel to someone working roads or construction or anything, right? We drove by the Tesla manufacturing plant here in Austin after we got back from Barcelona. And I forget what time it was, but it was well into the night, and you could see the shift change happening. You could see people coming in, everyone going out. So shift work is a big problem. And you see things like mental illness and chronic inflammatory disorders, diabetes, all those things that I've been talking about. There's a higher prevalence in these shift workers. Why? Because of the disrupted circadian rhythm. You cannot actually just stay up during the night and think you can replace that sleep during the day, because that's not how you were designed to live, right? And it's unfortunate because this is a lot of people's lives. I get that. And I'm not saying, you should just quit your job, although maybe you should find something else. But I'm sorry, your genetics, your brain is not designed to be up all night and not designed to sleep through the day. You, in fact, will not achieve the same sleep cycles during the day, period. You won't. Even if you're in a dark room, it's not going to happen. There's studies that show you have an altered sleep cycle during the day. You're not going to have proper sleep spindle bursts. You're not going to have adequate REM sleep. You're typically not going to reach stage 4 sleep. So there's various things that we're just not made to do, and shift work is one of them. Hope I don't get a lot of emails from shift workers yelling at me, but I'm just delivering the message. Okay. So, but this is why over the past several years, I've really been looking at developing strategies to really try and achieve that full restoration for my patients. I'm calling this New Bio Restore, right? So this methodology that stands for neurological and biological restoration. And it's an interplay between functional neurology, regenerative medicine, circadian biology, cellular senescence, and photomedicine, right? There's obviously a lot of details within that, but that's where we accumulate all of this information and how we can really, really try and restore and regenerate systems within our body. And it all has to start with how we're living, how we're trying to produce that symphony we call life. If that is broken, we're just giving people Band-Aids, right? So if we're not addressing the cellular senescence, which is going to be a whole nother podcast topic, if we're not addressing that has been provoked from the inflammation from chronic wrong living, because our circadian biology has been off for so long and we're inflamed and now our cells are going dormant, and that's promoting diabetes or promoting obesity or promoting a mental disability, whatever it may be. If we're not getting all the way back to that root cause, we are doing our patients and our society a huge disservice. So let's go ahead and stop there, because we've already gone through so much information and this topic is huge. We need to understand this topic because, as you can see, its influence goes so deep. It goes into every single cell in our body. So I want you to take time with this. I want you to understand this. So I want you to really take time to process, digest this information. In part 2, we're going to continue building on this foundation of information. And I'm going to give you some applications about how you can actually use this information in your daily life to influence whether it's a disease state or really just to improve your overall health and longevity. So come back next time and let's dive into part 2.
We hope today's episode has inspired you to take that next step toward your best self. Remember, the path to longevity is paved with small, daily decisions. Your journey is unique, and every step, every choice, brings you closer to your ultimate vision of a healthier, happier life. For more insights, tips, and resources, visit drbrandоncrawford.com.